0061603. Statement of Matthew Freedman regarding a bakery in the small town of Hillsboro, Missouri. Shipped to the Magnus Institute from the Usher Foundation on the 7th of July, 2007. Statement begins. You come to expect murder in St. Louis. At least that's what I did when I lived around there. The city's the homicide capital of the entire U.S., so a news report about a poor gunshot victim or an armed robbery is something you get used to seeing when you flick on the TV to look at the weather. I've bounced around the counties as my dad moved jobs here and there, but it was all satellite movement to the city before I grew up enough to settle down. Don't get me wrong, it's not the worst place to live, not by a long shot. At least we didn't live in Detroit. You never really expect the gunshot victim or person who was robbed to be someone you know, though. Someone you love. You never do. My entire life revolved around that city. But this is the Midwest, God love it. Once you get out of the counties around St. Louis or leave Kansas City, there's nothing but forests and farms out there. It's like going back 50 years, and I barely ever left the outskirts of the city. That is, until I met my late fiancée, Evelyn Harris, back in the 90s. That's a lot of time between kissing for the first time and popping the question, but I take my time with things, and what can I say? I was nervous. What kind of fiancé would I be if I didn't pay attention to her ring either? Expenses be damned, it was going to be exactly what she wanted. We joked about getting married, finally tying the knot, and discussed ring preferences, so I had plenty of ideas for the perfect engagement ring. A pewter band inlaid with some sphalerite crystals from the geology department of the University of Missouri at Rolla. I'm sorry, I know I'm supposed to be giving a statement, but I miss her so much. Not a day goes by that I don't think of my sweet Evie. She was the most beautiful woman I've ever met, the kind of lady that only exists once in a century, you know? She lived in small-town Missouri, went to college in small-town Missouri, and then moved back to her hometown. Once again, in small-town Missouri, a decently small town, about 30-40 minutes away from St. Louis, called Hillsboro. It's a pretty large departure from my normal, only about 3,000 people and probably more chickens than men. However, my wife was my life, so to speak, so Hillsboro became something of a second home. It was decent enough, rampant right-wingers aside. Whenever I was there, I didn't have to worry about flicking on the news to see a murder report like I did back home. All I had to do was sit back, relax, and spend quality time with the love of my life. But I have to say, it's boring. You see, there isn't much to do in Hillsboro. Maybe we could visit an old covered bridge, go fishing, eat at the local McDonald's, and then stop by the Taco Bell for a second course. That's the kind of thing you do when you're bored in Hillsboro. Hell, it's what Evie grew up doing her whole childhood, teenage years, and even most of her adult life. Then, in the summer of 2003, Bell's Baked Goods opened up off North Lemay Ferry. It was new, so folks flocked in the dozens, myself and Evie included. It was a small place, an old farmhouse renovated into a cozy, homey Italian bakery. The owner lived on the second floor. The place looked like it had been pulled from some pin-up illustration, minus the nude women and plus some crucifixes here and there. It had this jukebox in the corner, and not one of those fake old ones. It was a proper, beaten-up Wurlitzer jukebox, and I'm pretty sure she kept all of the original songs on it. It all combined to make a business that simultaneously felt like coming home as much as going out. Isabel Carnera, the owner, also happened to be the main employee. We never saw any other workers that came when we came to eat, which was surprising given the sheer amount of sweets set out behind the glass counters. She was there in the morning, there in the evening, and from what I and Evie could tell, all other hours of the day. Belle, as she was preferred to be called, was like average height, probably about 5 foot something, curly hair, round face, with a thicker build and a permanent blush on her cheeks. She looked like she stepped right out of a 1950s period drama, all day, every day, with the way she curled her hair and the style of her glasses. She damn near talked like it, too, when she wasn't acting like an Italian cook on the Food Network. To this day, I'm not sure if that was a bit or not. The place was sweet. Sickeningly sweet, even. The same sweetness you get when you leave a peach to ripen for too long. The donuts, cannolis, cheesecakes, cakes, you name it, it tasted... I don't have the words. It was some of the best grub I'd ever had. Hell, I would even say it was better than my mother's own cooking. I wish the thought of that place made me gag. I really, really wish it did. I hope to God that one day I'll stop wanting it. One day the thought of it will make me start drooling. Evie and I wanted to celebrate our engagement right before Valentine's Day. We were set to get married about 3 months from then, so you can imagine the scheduling crunch we found ourselves in. We were taking a break from all of our wedding planning that night. Evie worked herself to the bone for almost a whole week beforehand, getting some shit figured out with scheduling and venues, since we were trying to figure out where to have the wedding all over again. I decided that, for our collective sanity, we would catch the sundown special, as Miss Carnera called it, at the bakery. She would update the menu after 6 in the evening to include far more savory dishes, steaks that melted in your mouth, perfectly cooked chicken parmesan, homemade lasagna, and a whole slew of different pasta dishes that I could barely pronounce. All of it was seemingly cooked with the customer in mind, even if she hadn't met them before. I used to think that's all it was, that she was just a great cook with a boisterous personality. She was already out to greet us when we came in, as usual. She had a way of knowing when you would be around, standing by the counter in her red checkered dress and old, well-used and time-weathered apron. There were some red stains on it that day. When I asked about them, she just laughed and told me that she had a bit of an accident with some red dye for icing to go on heart-shaped cookies that she was preparing for Valentine's Day. I'd laughed with her at the time. Evie did too, and they chatted about different things that stained the worst. Evie described a particularly dirty construction job she'd supervised a few years ago, and even showed her pictures of the mud-caked clothes she had come home in after a sewage pipe burst from faulty plumbing. I hinted to Belle that it was more of a date than our other, more casual outings. She clearly got the memo, as she always did, and by the time I took my seat, the dusty old jukebox was singing out Sinatra and Dinah Shore like it was the end of the world. Of course, it was all background noise to what my sweet, wonderful Evie was saying. She graduated from Rolla in architectural engineering, the university there, you know. She would always have something new to say about the construction of the bakery, or projects her job had her on, or even the newest engineering intern she'd taken under her wing. I loved to listen to her talk for hours, regardless of if I understood a thing she said. It didn't matter, though. All that mattered was that my Evie could feel like she could talk openly with me, whether or not my brain could comprehend the intricacies of an HVAC system that she had overseen the installation of. Other men might worry about their wife being smarter, being more highly educated, but damn, I think her mind was the most beautiful, most attractive thing about her. I liked to joke that I would eat her up. Apologies. apologies, there was a slight interruption. Statement resumes. It was a wonderful night. We both ate and drank until we could barely move. Pasta with homemade pomodoro sauce, freshly baked bread, tortellini soup. It was godlike. God forbid I forget the tiramisu Belle served us for dessert. I swear it tasted like love. It's all made in-house, you know. I would go back if... Well, I wouldn't. I'll never go back there. No matter how much it calls. Evie went missing the next day. She went off to oversee her project and never came home. Of course, she's a very busy woman with a high-demand job, so I'm used to her crawling into bed at the ass crack of dawn. I waited patiently, and eventually the sun began to peek over the tops of the trees, and Evie still hadn't come home. I really started to get a bit worried at that point. I listened for the landline to ring, hoping that maybe she just had to stay extra late, even overnight, and that she would give me a call at any moment. I told myself so many fucking lies to keep from panicking that night, and that call never came. It never came. I was up sitting by that phone for hours. Eventually I called her work myself, her supervisor, her interns, but they all said she had left at her usual time and should have been home by 11 at latest. When the clock hit 10 in the morning and she still hadn't rolled into the driveway, I called the police to report her missing. I told them the last possible place she could have been, the address, what she looked like, numbers to call, what her car model was, and her license plate number. God, I don't think I've ever felt so grim before. It was like all the color had been sucked out of my house. No, our house. It didn't feel real. Still doesn't. We were about to get married, for fuck's sake. I lost count of how many searches I joined over the next few weeks, not to mention the amount of nights I went sleepless. Even in that cold, empty bed, I felt agony. I just laid awake staring at the ceiling as I tried to think of new places to look and search. She sure wasn't in any bed. She wasn't snug or warm. She had to be terrified, scared, and if not that, fighting for her life against some fucking captor. I thought about it so much that it actually made me throw up during one of the nights. During the second week of the search and investigation, the strong woman I fell in love with 10 years ago, in pain, sliced, bleeding out. It all felt like some kind of night terror, or one of those fucking 90s slasher films that use a woman's fear as a tool. Except it was real. It was very, very real. I started having nightmares during the first few weeks. They were gory, disgusting things, filled with so much meat and gore. It was all just badly cut meat. That's all I can remember now, really. That, and how I was eating it. No, wolfing is a better word. I was eating from the fucking nightmare buffet every single night for weeks. I still can't get the taste out of my mouth. It tasted like the flesh wasn't bled correctly, you understand? Like someone put a fucking penny in my mouth. There was so much blood. It should have been repulsive. I know it should have been, but in the dreams it was ecstasy. And that, well, I don't really want to think about it. I don't want to think too hard about what that means for now after all that's happened. I might just get in touch with that therapist the investigator recommended. By the time the third week rolled around, they had found her car. It was crashed into the trees off of the road about 30 minutes away from her workplace, but just out of the way that the search parties kept missing it. By this point, I was starting to lose hope and energy. I barely ate or drank, and what little sleep I managed to get was filled with images of bloodied flesh. The police and investigative units started to tell me to take it slower and get some rest, saying that it isn't what Evie would want. I knew, and still know for damn sure, that's bullshit. If it were me who disappeared without a trace, Evie would spend every penny she had to her name looking to find me. She would scour the entire goddamn earth if she had to. She's strong like that. She was strong like that. Stronger than me for damn sure. She's always been stronger than me. I decided to take a drive that afternoon after they told me to take it slower. It's always helped me clear my mind, you know? We don't have any lack of long country back roads in the Show Me State either, so I just got in the car and started driving. It all looks the same if you're not paying attention. I wasn't joking earlier when I mentioned how Missouri is nothing but farmlands and forests, because I drove for hours and saw nothing but trees. I didn't even see any deer. At the time, I thought I drove aimlessly. I was barely even focused on the road from how foggy my mind was, so when I rolled into my normal parking spot in front of Bell's Baked Goods, I was a bit shocked. I didn't even remember getting off onto Old Lee May Ferry. Checking the time, I discovered it was almost 7 at night, the exact same time Evie and I had come to eat our dinner 3 weeks prior. The reminder only made tears run down my face. I think I sat there for almost 15 minutes with my head in my hands and the steering wheel, crying. The place was welcoming when I got out of the car. The windows were lit and warm. This buttery light that looked as rich as the baked goods inside, spilling out onto the gray of the asphalt and bare trees. It was like the entire place was waiting for me, beckoning me inside. The bakery promised food and everything that is comfort and love. I could hear the old jukebox humming out some Nat King Cole, and honestly, I was glad I wandered in there at the time. I didn't have my wallet. I didn't plan on stopping anywhere when I got into the car, but at least I would walk in and sit next to the fireplace that Belle always kept stoked during the winter. She was cleaning the countertops when I walked in the door. Under the crucifix she always felt hung on the wall behind the counter. She greeted me, sounded happy to see me. She said that it was late in the evening, asked what brought me here, said that I hadn't been around in a little while. She had this smile on her face, and it faded slightly when I told her that I just wanted to clear my mind and ended up here. She nodded sympathetically and stopped her cleaning to come round the counter. She led me to the booth next to the fire, sat me down, and listened as I started pouring my heart out about Evie's disappearance. At some point, she slid a cup of warm hot chocolate in front of me and some fresh chocolate chip cookies. She said that they were on the house, then pulled up a chair and sat at the table. As for the second time that night, I broke down sobbing. They were shoulder-heaving sobs, the kind that make you feel like you can't breathe. All the while, her eyes and face were soft and accommodating, and she just seemed so understanding of my loss. She said that she knows what it's like to lose family. And after she said that, she fetched some Kleenex and put a hand on my shoulder. She said that Evie was one of the sweetest women she had ever had the pleasure of serving, and that she would make me a dish, no payment needed, that it was on the house. She was eager, very eager, but at the time I was so clogged up with tears and grief that I just couldn't catch it. I assumed she just wanted to brighten my spirits. As her hand left my shoulder, there isn't really a way to describe it. Nothing was wrong, I'm sure of it, but I felt like I was aware of the muscles in my shoulder and my arm. I could feel every tendon and twitch of muscle, the blood that made it all work, and all at once I was back in my nightmares of marbled, fatty meats and sliced flesh. It was so intense that a wave of nausea threatened to make me empty my guts onto the table. Belle just gave me a slight pat to the back as I laid down and promised to get me some proper comfort food to get rid of my blues. I still hadn't touched the coffee or cocoa. The taste of blood was heavy on my tongue as she walked away. I chalked it up to my inability to get a wink of sleep. Maybe I'd just been ruminating on the nightmares for too long. I don't know how long I laid there before the smell started to waft through the bakery. It was a savory, meaty smell, one that held echoes of spices and warmth. It was the best thing to ever grace my nose. I could hear Belle humming along from the kitchen to the old show tune that the jukebox was piping out, and in my mind's eye I got the image of that woman with blood-slicked hands handling freshly cut slices of meat, feeding them into a grinder, all while humming with some jubilant excitement as she prepared something that I could not recognize. The image lasted less than a moment before the warm comfort of cooking meat brought me out of it. I sat back up as the nausea abated and let my face fall into my hands. I daydreamed a bit as I waited about my beloved, sweet Evie walking back through the door of our home, falling into her arms and crying into her shoulder. But even that was ruined. You know the term, I love you so much, I want to be in your skin. My mind conjured that, but literal. I don't want to talk about the thoughts I had. I'm saving that for therapy. I was jolted out of this state by the sound of a porcelain plate clicking down onto the wooden table. Belle warned me, quite warmly, that the plate was a bit hot, and to be careful when I started eating as she slid the dish in front of me. On the dish were 3 meat pies, rounded little things basted with olive oil and peppered with spices. Spiced rice sat on the side as a compliment, but all my eyes could focus on were those pies. I'm pretty sure I started drooling onto the table when she set the plate in front of me. She stood by the booth and, with bloodshot eyes, watched me pick up the first pie and take my first bite. It was the best thing I've ever tasted, before or since. The flavors were intense, and the ground meat and spices inside were tender. It tasted like some sort of pork, sourced from the fattest, healthiest sow they could possibly find. The bread was divine, crunchy on the outside and soft on the inside, but nothing compared to the juicy, delicious, sweet meat within. I didn't pay attention to the rice as I devoured the first pie, and then the second. I couldn't stop myself. Hell, I could barely even breathe through my mouthfuls. She was talking as I ate, standing over the table, and sometimes gesturing with her hands. I couldn't even pay attention, though, so I just nodded, smiled, and kept devouring. Her hands were red in my periphery. I bit into the third pie and chipped my tooth. The pain shocked me out of that fogged, starving state for a moment as I sat dumbfounded. It brought me back to myself, and now that I wasn't wolfing down the pies, I could feel drool and whatever else was in those pies slipped down my chin. I saw the mess on my plate, half-chewed bits of food that had fallen from my mouth in my haste to stuff as much down my throat as possible, the untouched rice, and now the half-bitten third meat pie in my hands. The tooth marks where I hadn't bitten all the way through were bleeding. I swear to God they were bleeding. The blood was warm, and as I reached up to wipe my mouth, my palm came away smeared with red. I was confused and horrified, and underneath the welling of red there was a flash of muted silver. With a shaking hand, I pulled the pie apart, revealing red, unbled flesh. And inside, just under where I bit into the pie, was a pewter band inlaid with sphalerite crystals from the geology department at the University of Missouri at Rolla. I stared at the ring for a very long time after it fell into the growing pool of blood on my plate. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world had become a vacuum of ringing silence. The only senses that seemed to work were my smell, taste, and sight, each of which reminded me of the blood on my hands and in my plate, the meat in my mouth, and my dear, beloved Evie's engagement ring sitting in a rusted red puddle. I picked it up out of the plate and shakily wiped the blood away, and then I held it. I held it like it was the most delicate thing in the world. She said that she knew I would like it. She said, to finish up, that I didn't have to pay for it, that I didn't have to fuss. I could feel my muscles as she spoke, as my stomach dropped. I wanted to not like it. I wanted to throw it away. But I raised the bloody pie to my mouth, and I ate it. I had the feeling that if I didn't finish this meal, that the baker, who I had come to trust as a friend for years, would kill me, would butcher me, that she would make me into nothing but meat. Maybe that's all I ever was to her. Maybe I was always just meat, a fat steer waiting to be slaughtered and turned into burgers or steaks. Sometimes I wonder if she was fattening me up with my Evie, preparing me to be her next feast. She was smiling when I finally looked up at her. I could feel the tears pouring down my face, feel the sting in my eyes, but I paid no attention. A million things rushed through my head. Did you kill her? What happened to Evie? Why do you look excited? What kind of sick monster feeds a man his own fiancée? All I managed to croak out was, why? She smiled sweetly down at me. She looked like a proud mother or aunt or some kind of family member who had just witnessed me do something fantastic. The red of her lipstick started to drip. She said that I always did say how sweet Evie was. So she decided that she had to know for herself if she really was sweet. She said that I didn't exaggerate, that she was wonderful, so that I, of course, was obligated to have some as her future spouse. I was shaking badly by this point, disgusted at my lack of nausea as Belle pulled me up from my seat with a red-stained hand. I felt my bones twist in my... I felt my bones twist in my arm and my muscles spasm where she held me. I think she tore my rotator cuff. It was vile, and the noise that came from my mouth felt far more animal than human. She sounded concerned, even worried, and she asked if it hurt, and she said she was sorry, that she didn't mean to do it. She said I should go home, take some time to rest, because after all, the investigators told me to take it slow. She sent me off with a sling wrapped around my arm. She told me to come back soon, to call her if I needed anything at all, after she had killed my wife and fed her to me. The worst part isn't that I ate her. It's that those meat pies were the best thing that I've ever tasted. I could describe them as ethereal. I've never wanted seconds as badly as when she handed me those pies. I can't remember the last time I have ever been that ravenous. I didn't go to the police. How could I? I doubt they would believe that the local Italian-American baker had suddenly turned to cannibalism. Even if I did go, they would probably brush it off as some night terror that felt too real to me, something to be treated with antipsychotics, and something that my mind conjured up to make the disappearance of my beloved Evie make sense. It's somewhat familiar, in a way. It reminds me of when Evie and I were reading Lamb to the Slaughter by Roald Dahl. It's a short story where the wife kills her husband with a frozen lamb shank to the back of the head, and then cooks it and serves it to the police. We had to read it in a college English class together. She joked about how she should have just cooked her husband instead of the lamb shank. I think that's all. I'm going home. I'm really, really hungry. Statement ends. Now, this was sent to us from the Magnus Institute, actually. We had sent them a few of our statements, and so we just got them back recently. So the archivist in charge of the archives back there across the pond had actually included some of his notes, so I might as well read them. Gertrude had this statement delivered to the Institute about a decade ago. For what reason is still a mystery, though I do have Sasha now on duty to find other statements from the Usher Foundation that may be lost so that they can be sent back to where they belong. We did some follow-up on Matthew Freedman. Apparently, he was found guilty a few months later for the first-degree murder of his fiancée, Evelyn Harris. The police found a freezer in his home filled with different cuts of meat, which, when were DNA tested, were confirmed to belong to Harris. Her flesh was also confirmed to be in sausages and a leftover burger found in his fridge. Bell's Baked Goods indeed existed and was founded in July of 2003 by one Isabel Carnera, which matches Mr. Freedman's statement. However, according to what Sasha found online, the establishment closed its doors shortly after Mr. Freedman gave his statement, as she was moving internationally and could not continue to operate the bakery. Apparently she was moving to London, according to some of our disappointed patrons. I suppose we should keep an eye out for any murderous bakers. I might ask Martin to inquire around London to find if she truly did move here. Maybe he'll get to do a few more jigsaw puzzles. The more supernatural aspects of this case, however, I find very hard to believe. Some background on his family shows that his father was on medication for schizophrenia, and though Matthew himself was never diagnosed and the titular butcher of this story has no criminal background to speak of, I do believe that perhaps it was time for him to see a licensed professional. Therapists suggested by investigators aside. Day terrors and night terrors can be detrimental to mental health, and seeing as he admitted to getting very little sleep, food, or drink, it's possible that Mr. Freedman was suffering from acute hallucinations. Though there is one detail that catches my eye. In the kitchen of Mr. Freedman, the investigators found a recipe for schiscata stuffed with meat, written in the hand of one Isabel Carnera. At the top was written, "My recipe as requested, to remember your sweet beloved Evie by." Recording ends.